everybody. So glad that you're here with us tonight. Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey Lou, how are you?
I'm good. Henry, nice to meet you, and thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Yeah, we're
Well,
so
I
happy to
appreciate
have you.
you guys having me tonight. I really do. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Awesome. And we've got a great crowd tonight, so we're super excited to talk to you, learn more about your past, and do some tying with you.
We're so glad everyone could join us. And just as a reminder, uh, March 5th, we have Johnny King, which is next Wednesday. On March 19th, Jason Taylor. And on April 2nd, Blaine Chocolate. And uh, Johnny, we're probably going to give Johnny the Five Timers Award since he's been on the show so many times. And Jason, for filling in last year at the last second, he really came through for us. But we're so excited. But tonight, Henry, you're the man, and we're so excited to have you here, guide, fly tire, and the man who's teaching us all about how to catch no sodium stripers.
David, I'm super excited in particular to have a fellow Brooklynite on the show tonight. We've fished many of the same waters. Henry was obviously a pioneer and was doing it long before I was. But Henry, I'd be really interested to start out by hearing, and I'm sure folks on the show would be really interested to hear a little bit about your journey, because of all the people we've talked to, you've had, I think, in many respects, the most interesting path in your fishing career, from fishing the seawall on the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn to now chasing what you call sodium-free stripers in Lake Lanier in Georgia. Tell us a little bit about what got you from Brooklyn to Georgia.
Well, so I started fishing when I was probably about 15 or 16 years old. And I had my bike, my little two-wheeled bike, and had one of those PVC rod holders on the back frame, and that's where I kept my rod going up and down the bike path. This is long before I was fly fishing, but I was bucktailing back then. And that morphed into getting a car at, 18, 19 years old, and then going to Staten Island and fishing the bogs over at Great Kills Harbor. And from there, Cliff Street and down by Fort Wadsworth. And
Yeah.
eventually that led me around 1981 or two, I bought my first four-wheel drive Jeep Cherokee Chief, and that got me to the tip of Breezy Point Jetty, where that was my zip code for the next probably 5 years. I just lived on that jetty.
Mhm.
I
Did
loved
you
it.
grow up? So were you born in Brooklyn?
Yeah, I actually grew up. Do you know where Nellie Bly's is
Oh
over?
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
My kids
Caesar's
used to
Way.
we do their birthday parties there every year.
Okay, so if you were at Nellie Bly's and you turned around and looked east, there were five big buildings right there. They're still there. They were called Contello Towers. That's where I grew up. So I would
Uh,
take the elevator down from the 14th floor with a fishing pole and walk out to the back of Three Diamonds in the back of the garbage dump there. And that's where I cut my teeth
I
learning how
love
to
it.
strike bass fish.
I love
Wow.
it, David. For you, you may not know, and people on on tonight's Zoom probably don't know. Nellie Bly is a famous old school amusement park, not of the scale of a Coney Island. It's like a little kiddie amusement park, and I have lots of photos from my kids' birthdays there when they were like 3, 4 years old. So Henry, so talk about the journey from Brooklyn to Georgia. How did you get to Lake Lanier and to your
So
sodium-free
it's a
stripers?
great question. So long story short, I was in my day job was selling little girls' party dresses. And my company asked me to move out of New York. I ran sales for them in New York. We were a pretty good sized company, and long story short, they said, we want you selling the major stores. We want you selling Target and Walmart and Kmart and Costco. That's your bread and butter, but we don't want you in New York influencing the other salespeople. So live anywhere you want. So my wife and I looked up and down the country on the East Coast, looked up and down to see where we were going to relocate to. And none of the coastal airports, whether it was, whether it was over by Charleston or whether it was Jacksonville or Miami or any of these coastal towns, Nobody had an airport that flew directly to Minnesota, directly to Bentonville, Arkansas. Everything was through Atlanta. So, and my wife is from Atlanta. She lived in Atlanta for 10 years. And so she was excited when I said, I'm going to look into Atlanta because it'll make my life easier traveling wise. And I called up and I found out that they had these freshwater stripers in Atlanta, and I didn't know anything about them, but I said they're stripers, right? So called up the Department of Natural Resources, who hooked me up with a guide, who's a conventional guide. Nobody's fly fishing down there. And I called the guide and I said to the guide, can you catch these things on a popper on top? And he said, oh yeah, we love popper fishing. I said, okay, can you catch them with a bomber long A 5 feet under the surface? He goes, oh yeah. He goes, that's one of our great bites. And I said, okay, last question. How about a bucktail jig? He goes, probably our number one lure is a bucktail jig. And when I heard that, I just said, you know what? I can fly fish and do everything just based on the lines I'm using. And I can figure this out. So I told my wife we're moving to Georgia. She became the happiest lady in the world and got down there. And believe it or not, for a guy who'd been striper fishing for probably the better part of 22, 23 years, I didn't catch a fish the first 6 months. I mean,
Wow.
I struck out.
Wow.
Nothing. And I was fishing my job allowed me to fish 4 or 5 days a week. So I wasn't a weekend warrior. I was going out there pretty heavy to learn. I really liked fishing. And so anyway, long story short, it took me 6 months to figure it out. And I finally, with some help from an angler who was just starting to fly fish, he didn't know what he was doing. So we kind of swapped information. And I said, I'll teach you everything you need to know about fly fishing if you'll tell me what you know about 30 years of fishing Lake Lanier. And it was a beautiful friendship until he passed. And so that sped up the learning curve. But
Love that.
that's
what was the
whole thing.
difference? I mean, you'd been such a successful striped bass fisherman in the salt. Like, what was it that you had to relearn? What was the difference?
The difference is there's no tides in fresh water. And
Right.
as guides, we don't talk about this out loud, but every guide has what I call a tidal clock in his head. So in other words, we know that if the tip of Breezy Point is going to be good, or let's make it even easier. If we're going to fish Montauk, we know that the south side by the Browns is going to fish best on this tide, and that the North Bar is going to fish best on that tide. So depending on when you're going fishing, what time you're going, you look at the tide chart and you go, okay, I already know my roadmap because I've got all these spots based on the tide. You don't have that luxury in fresh water. It's all about patterns and the fish moving, and the fish are moving to find food and bait. And the bait, all they care about is what's the water temp, because the water temp dictates where the bait's going to be. Are they going to be in the back of the cove? They're going to be in the mouth of the cove. They're going to be out over open water. Are they going to be on humps 20 feet down? They do so many different things throughout the year. It's really hard. I'll tell you, it's the hardest fishing I've ever done. It's unbelievably rewarding, but it's hard.
Interesting. So Henry, in the vise, you have a hook, and you're going to be tying on it. But let's talk about that hook before we start tying the fly, because it's different than other hooks we've had people tie on in the show.
Yeah, so this is what's called a 60-degree bend jig hook. And the purpose of this hook is because you're tying it, it's going to ride hook up. The fly's going to ride hook up every time because of the 60-degree bend on there, as opposed to, say, a J hook, where the hook always rides down like this. 60-degree bend rides up. And we get this. This actually came about from the West Coast. Stripers out in the San Joaquin Delta is a very big fishery out there for those Northern California guys,
Right.
as well as some of the lakes and some of the rivers, whether it's the American, the Sacramento, or the San Luis, which is a freshwater fishery. Most of the stuff they've learned comes from the East Coast shifting west. Well, here's one of the things that us East Coast guys learned from the West Coast shifting east. Dan Blanton popularized fishing jig hooks.
Right.
And the purpose of a jig hook is two reasons. Number one, it rides hook up, as you see, as I've got it in the vise. So, you know, if you're going to tie a fly, the color is going to be up here and the white or the natural belly is going to be on the bottom side down here. But the other thing with a jig hook is because it's got this sort of 60-degree bend on the eye of the hook, when you hook a fish, when you're fishing with a J hook like this, and you got a big fish on and you're pulling, you can sometimes rip that fly out of the fish's mouth. When you're fishing with a jig hook, this turns out as this leader comes like this, your tippet is like this. As you're pulling, this thing is going down, and you're actually, the top of this is going down, and it works as a lever. So it's actually sinking the fly deeper into the fish as opposed to pulling it out. So you lose less fish with a 60-degree bend jig hook, as well as you won't get a gut. I've never caught a fish gut hook on a 60-degree bend.
So, you know,
jig hook.
that's so interesting. Before you tie, could you show us the fly you're going to tie tonight, a finished product, so people get an idea of what's going to happen?
So let me just do this. Here's a fly. This is called the darting baitfish. And you can see there's the jig hook going up. It's going to ride just like this, hook up. And what's really interesting is when we peel this apart, you can see there's a bump back in there. And that's the weight. That's the weight that we're putting in. Most of the time, guys, as you know, when we weight a fly, we're either putting the weight in on the nose of the hook, on the nose of the eye rather, like this, or we're going to make it like a Clouser style dumbbell eye, like this, where it goes about a third of the way back, and that gets your fly to fall. Or you might even consider putting lead wraps around the hook to get it to track straight. But more importantly, what this does is, one of the problems is Popovics always talked about, and we have a tribute to Bobby, and for this season, Bobby always talked about making sure that you create a fly to solve a problem. When you tie with synthetics, they tend to hit the water, especially like the EP fibers, and they stay on top. They don't sink quick enough. And that's probably a good thing if you're snook fishing in the mangroves. But for most of us, when there's fish under the boat, you want that fly to hit the water and go down. And that's where it pays to have weight on your fly, so those synthetics make it sink quickly. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to put the weight back on the back of the fly, and what they call keel weight the fly. And when you keel weight the fly, the interesting part about it is when you strip hard and stop, the back tries to jump the front. So instead of like on a typical jiggy hook where he puts the jiggy head on there, the fly does this. And how you weight your fly is going to determine which way the movement of the fly is going to be. What are you trying to accomplish? When you put a Clouser on there, the Clouser eyes, the fly is going to go straight and sink down, and go up and sink down. This, when you keel weight it, the fly is going to kick because the back is trying to go in front of the front. So you're actually getting a darting action as opposed to an up-down action or an even keel. And
Really
I'm all about what do you want the fly to do? And so how you weight your fly is really fascinating to me, whatever fly you're going to create. It doesn't have to be my fly. It could be anybody's fly. David, I know you love fishing deceivers. And one of the things I've always loved is me personally, when you fish a deceiver, those feathers are put on prayer style. So when it comes through the water, it goes like this. Right. But when you fish a half and half, which is a Clouser and a deceiver, that fly is going to sink. Well, you don't want the feathers doing this. You should tie them flat wing so that they do this. The natural curvature of the feather moves with how how the fly is going to react in the water based on the weight. So that's what all this is about. And a guy by the name of Dave Sellers was the guy who came up with keel weighting flies to try and mimic what conventional anglers call a zoom fluke, which is one of these crazy soft plastic baits that just do all this kind of crazy stuff in the water, underwater. And so that was the whole purpose of him keel weighting a fly.
So Henry, show us how you get this keel set up on the hook.
Okay, so the original way the keel weighted flies were, they would take a hook like this and they would put like about a 2 or 3 inch piece of 40 or 50 or 60, maybe even 80-pound mono off the back, and then they would take lead wire, wrap it around there. So the further back you go, the easier the fly wants to jackknife. But my flies are tied so sparse that I didn't want to do that, because you just see this big old fat weight sitting back there. And I just didn't want that to happen. So I found these, and I'm going to hold them up for you guys to see. They're called scud weights, and they come in a number of sizes. This is the large. They're made out of tungsten. This thing is pretty heavy, believe it or not. There's a lot of weight behind this. And you can see that in these weights, they're sort of like shrimp kind of shell looking, you know, like a scud, like a freshwater shrimp. And you can see that there's grooves in between there. So all you need to do is pull one of these out, put it on the back of the hook, right before the bend, and just tie your come on, stay up there. There we go. You want to tie your mono thread into those grooves and then tie forward. And now you can see that scud hook, that tungsten scud weight on the back is tied in. And then you can either just take some light curing adhesive and put it over the wrap so that the thing doesn't move. Or, you know, what I like to do is I like to take flat braid and cover the whole thing. And the braid I usually use is Bill's body braid. And then I'll just start from back here, palmer it over the front, and I'm done. That weight is now secured for the life of the fly. That being said, I'll take out my crystal flesh. I've got the belly in David's favorite color, which is white. Just kidding. I know David is a big fan of more of the natural belly, which I get. So again, for me, I am so used to tying sparse. Guys, my fishery is clear water most of the time. And like the guys out west on the Delta, they're gonna tie very heavy, bulky flies, because the water's really tannic and dirty out. Not dirty, but it's dark. So they need to push water for the fish to feel the fly. Where I'm fishing, for the most part, you know, I want something to be sparse because it'll move better in the water. It's free. There's more freedom to it. And on top of that, it's easy to cast. That big bunker fly I showed you, I can cast that with a 9 weight. And I could cast, here's one that I tied up that's sort of a small bunker, probably about 8 inches. All right. You can cast this with a 7 or an 8, no problem, because it's so sparse. Okay. That's the whole ticket. And when you're tying big flies, the only thing I'm going to tell you is with these synthetics, they can try to foul. So what I do is I take a little bit of that light curing adhesive, and just at the bend in the hook right here, I go about maybe 2 or 3 inches back to here. And I just coat it in the middle here, this like a big old square on both sides with that light curing adhesive. And what ends up happening now is it won't bend any further than that. It protects fouling by putting a little light curing adhesive right in here. So
just on that middle section, Henry, you're right. Just a little bit on that middle section.
Exactly. So that's just a tying tip that I like.
Yeah, and it also, by not going too far back, you don't affect the movement of the fly as you're swimming through the
100%,
water.
David.
Yep.
100%. So,
Hey, Henry, while you're doing that, a couple of, first of all, nice to see Brad Buzzy on here. Hey, Brad. He sends a shout out to you. He says,
Brad.
where's the hot pink fluorofibers?
I don't even know what he's talking about.
There it is.
Brad, it's coming, buddy. It's coming.
And there
So,
was actually a couple questions about those the 60-degree hook. One question from Silas is he's using the RX 26-degree hooks, and he was curious if that difference in angle, how much of a difference that actually makes.
you know, I've not fished, I've not tied on those. Um, this is let's see what this one is. This is the SA 254. It doesn't say it to me, it looks like a 60-degree bend jig hook
Mhm.
from let me see if I don't get too close. Do you see it's a
Yeah.
little bit different of an angle, but it's still a 60, so I'm not really sure about that. I've not tried it.
Mhm.
Um,
And then there
but
was a
I'll
related
make
question, which is, given your saying that one of the things you like about those 60-degree bent hooks is just the better hook set. Would you just use them on all flies for larger game fish, or is it just really for specific applications? I mean,
No, on the large flies, I tend not to work. I don't use them as much because, interestingly enough, at least what I have found, when I'm fishing to these big stripers, whether I'm on the lake or even, if I'm fishing, let's say, Raritan Bay where Joe Maz fishes and does a lot of his guiding for those big fish, or out where Dixon is out east in Montauk, what I have found is that those big bass, when you're fishing those big flies, they're all crashing these bunker on top. So I don't need the hook to ride up. It doesn't matter at that point that it's a J hook or a 60-degree bend jig
yeah.
hook. But I will tell you, the 60-degree bend jig hook, if you tied it that way, if you could find like a 6 or an 8/0 60-degree bend jig hook, you're gonna lose fewer fish. There is absolutely no doubt. And another thing is, I have never ever caught a striper with a 60-degree bend jig hook with the fly all the way down his throat. It's
Mm,
usually always around the
fascinating.
mouth, just slightly inside.
That's really interesting. Lou, I think Chris at Saltwater Flies is going to be getting a call from us really shortly.
I think so too. Yep. That's great. That's great to hear. And especially as we're trying to
Yeah.
protect these fish and treat them better and catch and release, situations. That's great to know.
So
So
when you're tying this in, Henry, I noticed that you're tying long hanks, but you're cutting off long sections after you tie in. Are you using those other hanks that you cut off, or it's
yeah,
just okay?
yeah, I am. Nothing goes to waste. I need to save money for eggs. So so
What?
I've been now it's just basically, some people call it a high tie over and I call it an over and under. I just keep going back and forth and back and forth and working up the shank of the hook. But I just want you to notice more than anything, David, how little material I'm using.
Very
It's
sparse. Yep.
it's really, really sparse. And now when you start tying in past the first one, the first tie-in, you always want to come up a little bit shorter on the second tie-in. So I move the fly up the shank of the hook some, but I come in back here. You can see here's where my material ends here, and now I'm over here. So I've probably come up about an inch, give or take. And put that down. I grab my white, turn it back over here. The only thing I will say that some people like to do and is they will put in where I'm just tying on the top and the bottom, because we have that scud weight on there. Some people will like to tie in along the side, one row, just in the back, just to fill it out a little bit more so that we don't have that gap. Sometimes I'm looking to see if I have one. Well, yeah, this one. So this one I filled in, and you can see there's very little gap between the top and the bottom. But this one, I did not fill in. And you can see right here, there's a little bit of a gap in there, just a little. And if you'll put one row on each side, you'll fill it with the white. You'll get rid of that gap if it bothers you.
Yeah.
Again, you know, we're talking about, I'm sitting at the Vice listening to Johnny King play his jazz music, and I'm just trying to knock out as many flies as I possibly can in as short a time as I can.
Yeah, that gap looks very much like a lateral line to me, so I kind of like it.
Then again, I pull out no major clumps here, just all sparse. I come in, I go back up here, I go a little bit shorter, and I tie it in as I'm moving up the hook. And then I'll take the white. And, you know, everybody is, again, the material you use is less important to me than making sure that what you're using is just sparse and you know, listen.
And you're consciously making each additional hank slightly shorter, so you don't have to work so much about shaping
Correct.
after you tie in.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of important because
That's a good point.
yeah, I mean, it saves so much time if you could just do all that up front.
When we're done and I hold this thing up, this thing is going to look, when we're done, before we shape it, this thing is going to look like Don King's hairdo. You know, it's going to be just real everything everywhere. It's going to look like it exploded. Then I grab some of my leftover olive on this side. And again, guys, you can tie this. You can put 3 colors in. You can put, you know, olive, lavender, and white, or, you know, I'll tell you one of the.
Or Brad's pink.
Oh, that's right. Or Brad's pink. Brad's pink is coming at the end. But, you know, what's really one of the things I will say is, you know, I didn't start fly fishing. Most guys started fly fishing for trout. And I didn't. I started fishing. I was a saltwater guy my whole life living in Brooklyn. So when I went over to fly fishing for the first time, you know, I was already, you know, I was already cutting the salt. So when I was looking for new things, new colors, I would go into, back in the day, you know, a Herman's World of Sports or one, you know, Capital Bait and Tackle. And I would go in there and see what's new that they're selling. What is Bass Pro Shops touting these days? You know, one of the hot colors for us right now, and it has been for like the last 5 years, maybe even 7 years, has been a color they call sexy shad. Have you guys ever heard of it?
No.
Yeah, see, that's a lure color. And, you know, we're talking about this season being a tribute to Popovics. You know, Bobby was a, you know, was a saltwater guy, and a lot of the inspiration and things he got was from back in the day when, you know, on the beaches of New Jersey, he was seeing what the lure guys were all doing, and that's kind of what inspired him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I did when I first started. You know, I have a fly, which I'll show you, that back in the 90s, I got laughed at. There was a lot of controversy on it because people were saying, oh, it's not a fly, it's a lure. And my number one lure when I was fishing for stripers on that, on the, between, you know, between Caesars Bay Bazaar and the 69th Street Pier along the Bell Parkway, was a lure. It was a Roadrunner. A Roadrunner is a bucktail with a spinner blade. And so when I started fly fishing, I needed a fly. This is still my best searching pattern.
Mm.
All it basically is, for the most part, is it's a rabbit clouser, but it has a spinner blade tucked in the front. And when I'm searching and I don't see fish on top, this will find me fish.
Mm.
And what's really interesting about this is there are three types of spinner blades on this fly. This is an Indiana blade. It looks like a teardrop, if you can see.
Yep.
That's a blade that gives you a little bit of flash and a little bit of you can feel it. You know what I mean? It's more for just feeling the pulsating of the blade. Then you have a willow leaf blade. You watch the bass guys that have these diamond shaped willow leaf blades. That's all flash. And then you have a Colorado blade, which is a big round blade, which is nothing more than just they won't see it as far as flash goes, but they will feel that blade in the water. And so you can change the blade out depending on what kind of water you're fishing, if it's clean or whatnot. It's been a great fly. And again, that all came from the conventional side for me. And that's kind of where I learned a lot about this stuff.
Do you buy those hooks with the blades, or you buy the blades and attach them to the hook?
You have to buy you buy the blades, and then you buy the barrel swivels, and then you buy the split rings, and you put it all together on your own.
Okay. So,
and if you're going to do that, what you're going to need is a set of split ring pliers.
yeah.
All right. And for anybody who doesn't know, you can see right up here, it's got that little notch to open up that split ring. And I just can't tell you how many times, long story, I'll say that for another time, but Lou Tabery gave me the idea when I fished Connecticut, and he saw me catching fish on it. And I was complaining to him one day in the suds. I said, Lou, guys are giving me a hard time about this. He goes, Henry, take those and send it to the IGFA and see what they say. So I called the IGFA, and the IGFA basically said to me, give me 5 of those and I'll send it to our council. And it was Chico and Lefty and Stu Apt and what's his name? Mark Sosin and one other guy. And 4 out of 5 of them said, if you caught a world record fish with that, we would accept it. One guy said no. And I don't really know who it was. I think it may have been, it was probably Brad Buzzy. Anyway, all right. So we've got all this tied in now, okay? And now this is one of the great triggers that I learned back in the mid 90s. All this stuff coming out of South Africa. There was this guy. Any of you guys remember Paul Van Reenen?
I know the name, but I don't remember him.
Yeah.
Well, raise your hand if you're in the audience listening to this and you remember Paul Van Reenen. Paul Van Reenen started what he called Success Flies. And the packages all said success on them. I should have brought a package out. I still have some of his original ones. When I was at one of the shows, Paul and I were chatting, and he showed me this stuff called fluorofiber. And it comes in 50 colors. But here's the interesting thing. This color, which is called fluoro pink, it's fluorescent pink, is the only color that I've ever seen in any flash anywhere. And I'm going to try and show this now, but I don't know if it's going to show. But you guys can see at home that this thing is hot pink. But depending on how the light hits this thing, it turns to a hot orange, turns to a mauve. Depending on how the light hits it, this thing changes color. So that gave me the idea, the heck with putting in red crystal flash in a throat. I'm going to put this stuff in there a little bit. And depending on which way the fish is coming from the direction from down to above or above down, and the way the sun is, this thing's gonna flash and show a different color and maybe be a trigger. Long story short, I put it in just about 95% of my flies. And I will tell you, it's the best trigger I've ever used, and I use it. And the guys that are listening in from Georgia, tonight can tell you, you can't fish my lake with a clouser without this stuff in it, because the guy who's in your boat with the pink fluorofiber in the back of the boat is going to outfish you 6 or 8 to 1. It's that dramatic. And we've tried this experiment. I tried it in Stamford Harbor back in the day, and a buddy of mine were both fishing 300 grain lines. I had a olive and white clouser. He had an olive and white clouser, same fly, one with, one without. I was using it. I was out fishing him 5, 6 to 1. We bit the fly off. We swapped, and he starts out fishing me 5, 6 to 1. This stuff is the magic juju for your flies. I am just telling you. If there's
You should
anything
see,
I can
Henry,
leave
you
you
should
with
see the
tonight.
chat box lighting up right now from everyone going, it's true, facts. Yep, gotta have the pink.
It's really hysterical.
And then, so the other thing I'm going to show you is, so when you buy a package of this, and this goes not only with this, but with any of the materials that you're putting flash in, most of us open up the package and pull the thing out because it's on a, it's got a zip tie in here, and we hope that we take what we want and put it back in. I'm telling you, it's a mistake. It's not a good idea. What you want to do is make a cut with a scissor just on a 60-degree angle and cut it on the side, and don't take it out of the package. Then you can use it as a dispenser and preen out as much or as little as you want. And it works beautifully. You want to take out 5 strands, you want to take out 10 strands. It's just so much easier than ending up with flash all over the place. It gets on the dog. Then your wife busts you and go, what did you do? The dog is full of flash. And, so I like to always cut my packages like that. So I cut off just a little bitty piece of this stuff. You can see how little I've got. I don't use a lot of it. And I'm just putting it as a throat, just the way you would put red crystal flash on a deceiver. And that's it. That's all you need to put on there. I'm telling you, you don't need a lot. And then, because I'm a little bit of a stickler, I'm not a huge flash guy in general. So what I will then do is I will cover up that last piece. I will cover up that last piece of fluorofiber that I put in with a little bit more of the white so I can hide it. I just want them to see it. And even that little bit in there, and you can just see it's just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's going to make a difference.
Henry, it's funny. I don't think there's a fly in my box that I use for stripers, aside from the little brown fly, where there's no pink.
Yep.
I think that's so spot on.
And David, do you know why that is?
Well,
why they love pink? It's because most stripers are female, and chicks dig pink.
Oh.
All right.
I didn't see that one coming, but cool.
All right. So we've got that all that we're about 95% done on this fly. And now all I'm going to do is get everything, sweeping it back. And you can see it's just all over the place, unruly and whatnot. It's not terrible, but that's because we went shorter. We made, as you said earlier, David, we saved ourselves a bit of time by doing that to trim it. So now what I'm going to do is, when I'm trimming this thing, I'm going to make a V going back, a V going up. And that's going to get me, with a large pair of scissors, a large cutting area on my scissors. And you can sit here and trim this thing till the cows come home, everybody. And then on the bottom, I'm just going to try and round off the belly a little bit. And on the top, I'm going to do the same. And because this is only an hour's long program, we're going to try and just leave it as best we can right here. So I've got that on there.
Mostly you're just trying to cut it off so it doesn't look like chunks, but you're just trying to make it look nice and even and rounded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I like to do is, now I'll tie on my I'll put this back on some more thread, and just to give it a nice clean finish, what I'm going to do, where is that? Where's that piece? You got away from me. I'm tying without a light, so I can't see where my excess is, but for argument's sake, so now, depending on how big a fly I'm using, I'm going to take some peacock herl.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And I'm going to take, again, not a lot, just a few strands, maybe 6 or 8 or 10 at the most. Again, I'm a sparse guy. You can see there's not a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to stack it so it's all the same length. Line it up in the middle. I hope Buzzy is happy now because he's got his pink in there. When Brad's at the shows,
I'm sure we're going to see comment from Brad very shortly after that.
yeah, I usually keep Brad pretty busy selling this stuff after I do a featured fly tire for Ben or anybody. So now oops, damn, that wasn't good. Let me get this back. I lost control. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to tie that up. Again, it's not the prettiest, but it'll do for tonight. And then I'm going to show you what I do to get this to lay right. This is where your wife can come in and help you tie. So when we get done with this, we now have the peacock in here, but you see how the peacock is standing up and everything is going back? So the way we control that is like when you take a present and you're tying a ribbon, you pull the peacock away from all the other feathers.
Yep.
Take your scissor and just put your thumb in your forefinger and pull back 1 or 2 times. And now that peacock is going to lay perfect on the hook.
Look at that. That's pretty darn cool.
All right. And then finally, this is where, and I listened, I can't remember if it was with your, when you guys were with Farrar and you guys were just chatting about are eyes important?
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember that.
This is a running conversation.
I think they're really important. I am a big believer. And now I'm not telling you I'm right. I'm just telling you that, this is all about confidence. And whatever gives you confidence is what you should be believing in. So I'll take my super glue, which is the gel, and I will put just a dab. I will put just a dab of it on the eye.
What are you using there? Loctite?
Yeah.
Okay.
I put the Loctite gel on there. Place it where I want. And then what I'm going to do, I'll just hold it down for a few seconds, but then believe it or not, I'm going to hit it after. You can see what it's starting to look like. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of the light curing adhesive on the outside, just to give it to let it stay. And I'll just take a little bit of that, hold it down with my thumb, put it just on the outside around the edges of it. All right, everybody shade your eyes. And that fly, I could do the other side as well, but because I know we're on a time crunch here tonight, that is your darting bait fish.
That's beautiful. That's
great. It's been a really successful pattern. not just for stripers, for largemouth bass, and we've caught snook on it, we've caught redfish on it. It's just, but the key is how you work that fly. And for me as a guide, I want my customers to be able to, how the action they impart on their retrieve and what we've used to tie on to make that fly is going to make all the difference in the world.
So
Um,
do you,
and
do you
so
have a question just popped up and we kind of addressed it earlier, but do you have a particular strip you use with that fly when retrieving?
I do. It's just basically pop, pop, stop, pop, pop. You notice how hard, little short, maybe 10-inch strips and stops like that. And that'll get that fly to jackknife because the back, where all the weight is, wants to come forward in front of the fly.
Right.
So that's what we do. Here's something interesting, David. On our lake, Lefty, by the way, today's Lefty's 100th birthday, just in case.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, well, 100 years
How did
old.
we not know that? That's
And I
incredible.
am just, I miss him to this day like a second dad. I miss him so much. The way, I miss Pops too, but I know the Jersey guys were heartbroken when Bobby passed away too soon. And I had that kind of relationship that they had with Bobby. I had that with Lefty. And so it still hurts, guys. It doesn't go away.
Henry,
Um,
talking about Lefty, you told us a wonderful story about one of the last times Lefty wrote you a letter. Could you tell us that story again? It was so heartfelt.
Hey David,
um,
let's why don't we come back on screen for
Sure.
this last part? Yeah, I'd love to hear that, Henry, too.
I'd like to know too, what letter?
Um, I think Lefty had asked you for something, a particular, I guess it was a particular fly or something. We were
Oh,
talking
yeah.
last week.
So
Yeah.
I had asked Lefty, I said, Lefty, he had called me and said he was going to do some striper fishing. Um, and he said, and he had brought up to me that the hardest fish that he ever had to feed on a fly rod of all, like, I think he's caught, I don't even know what the number was, 84, 86 different species.
Mm.
The hardest fish he ever had to hit a fly is a striper when they're on bait this big.
Mm.
And so, I sent them some of these flies, these little something else flies that I tie, which I happen not to have one here, with the fluorofiber on it. And he said it worked. It worked like a charm. It was just he was about to write his 34th book before he got sick, and he said that book was supposed to be about flies and triggers and how to make fish eat and just unusual things that would come up. Now, I'm not aware of this because I don't tarpon fish enough, but apparently somewhere on the east coast of Florida, near the Indian River somewhere, there are tarpon that they call them corkscrew tarpon. They come up and feed, and then when they go down, they corkscrew down like this, and they're just boogers to feed.
Mm.
And so, but somebody figured out something. And so he was going to write about that. And so anyway, he was going to put that something else fly, my little something else fly, in the book because I had him fishing down here. Even a better story, David, is I had Dan Blanton, the West Coast
Yep.
striper pioneer out west, came to Atlanta the first time. And he spent 4 days with me fishing my Lanier stripers. And I said, Dan, you better put on one of these little something else flies. Henry, my Whistler and my Sarmalmac will take a striper any day. There isn't a striper on the planet that won't eat it. After I had my sixth fish on my something else, he turns around and goes, give me one of those little shitty flies. And I'll never forget that. And Dan is one of my dear friends. I love Dan to pieces. And he ties, I mean, let's face it, his Whistler is one of the most iconic flies ever
Yeah,
designed.
sure.
Yeah.
It catches everything. And to this day, I understand, like northern pike, they won't leave that fly alone. And I've never fished really for northern pike, but I hear it's just, amongst other things, it's a dandy. So
I use that whistler for tarpon when I go to Mexico when they're in deeper water. Great fly.
yeah, and I think he used to fish it, and I could be giving you the wrong. I think it was the Rio, Colorado,
In Costa
um,
Rica.
Costa Rica. He
Yeah,
he that was where he said that thing was deadly.
yeah.
And so, yeah, he's an incredible angler. I've never seen a guy, I've never had anybody in my boat that from sunrise to sunset is casting while he's eating a sandwich. He won't put the rod down. He's like that little kid. When you take a little kid, David, you must have seen this in your boat. You take a little kid out and the fish are blowing up everywhere. And there's like 300 fish on top. And you look at the kid and you go, so how many of those do you think you want to catch? And the kid looks, he goes, all of them.
All of them. Yeah,
That's Blanton. I want to catch them all.
that's great.
Hey, Henry, I
Well,
have a couple other quick questions here. One was from Joseph Clark, was asking if you can tie your baitfish pattern on the same jig hook and get the same results, or whether the polar fiber kills the action.
No, the polar fiber won't kill the action at all. The problem with polar fiber, Joseph, is that we love the material because it's so supple and it breathes. For a synthetic, I like it better than craft fur, quite frankly. Again, that's the stuff that comes out of South Africa. That's all Renzetti's bringing that in, and distributes it throughout the United States. The problem with polar fiber on a bigger fly is it's going to foul. I don't know how you're going to stop polar. It's so supple. It's way more supple than any of these synthetics, these kinky kind of synthetics that we're using, or even the yak hair. So you're going to have to by all means, you're going to have to put in some of that light curing adhesive off the back of the fly to stop it from fouling. One of the flies you showed on the advertising this session, you had a picture of my baitfish fly, and
Yep.
you'll see on the top, it's olive flash and slinky. On the bottom, it's white flash and slinky. And in the middle was a strip of white polar fiber coming off the back. And the reason for that was that, and I would again stiffen the polar fiber coming off the back of the fly, because when you take some of these materials and you don't make them long enough, you want a small one, it comes through the water. A clouser doesn't breathe at 2.5 inches or 2 inches. That bucktail needs length in order to start doing its thing. Synthetics similarly needs a little bit of length, but when I tied that baitfish pattern, which Umpqua and Orvis and all of them carry, it's just called Cowen's baitfish, you'll see a strip of polar fiber in the middle, so that when you strip it, you just get a little bit of kick in the tail from the polar fiber, even though the rest of it just gives you the body shape of a peanut bunker or a shad or a herring or whatever.
there's another question here, which is kind of it's doesn't have an obvious answer, but maybe it does. Are you using a different knot to tie the jig hook in? What knots do you use?
I just tie, what do they call it? The uni loop or the Kreh loop, or
Okay.
yeah, just that.
Nothing
I don't
special.
get nuts or knots over that.
Um, and and Joe Matz has a very interesting question. Will that work? There's got to be a story behind this. Will that work on 23rd Street?
You know, it could. Listen, you're gonna laugh. Luian, I have fished every manhole cover in Brooklyn in the Bensonhurst Bay Ridge area. There is not a manhole cover to Coney Island that I haven't tried. I just want you to know. So it
I love it.
probably would.
I love it. I love it. Well, what an incredible evening of tying. And I guess, Henry, as you mentioned at the beginning, this season of Masters of the Fly is really a tribute to Bob Popovics, who left us too early. And you said a few words about him, but and gosh, I had no idea it was Lefty's 100th birthday too. That's it's fitting that we're having you today. I wonder if you just maybe say a word for all of us about what it meant to know guys like Lefty and Pops, and what they meant to you as a fly fisherman, and also what we should think about the legacy that they've left for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, the history of the sport is so important. You know, where we're going today, we have so many more young people today getting involved in the sport. And it's just, you know, we have to pay it forward to those guys. And guys like Lefty and guys like, you don't see this all the time from some of the old timers, but guys like Lefty and especially guys like Popovics and guys like Whitlock, I was really close with. Dave was one of the sweetest guys you'd ever meet. Um, and those guys, they were always approachable. They were always engaging for people, would answer any question. Um, a real funny story I had with Lefty real quick. Now, remember going to a show in Secaucus, New Jersey back in the 90s. Do you remember they had David, do you remember they had the fly show near
Yeah, I
Giant
do.
Stadium?
Right by Giant Stadium. Absolutely do.
That's right. So I went to that show and I brought a knot. I showed Lefty a knot that I used to tie when I was conventional fishing back in the 80s on the tip of Breezy Point Jetty. And I just that's how we attached the Dacron to the 6 or 8 foot leader for the lure on the other end.
Yeah.
And I tied this knot and showed it to him. And Lefty looks me square in the eye. I showed him the knot and he goes, Henry, that's an old Costa Rican barrel knot.
Mm.
And I looked, I go, a barrel knot? He goes, yup, it's a Costa Rican knot. And I'm sitting there going, I'm thinking, how the heck could somebody actually know that? You know, that's like the old, I call him like I see him. And if I don't see it, I make it up. And that was Lefty. And he was incredible. The guy was just incredible. Popovics, you know, I was friendly with Popovics, but not like the guys that tune into your webinar, that whole Jersey crew. Those guys, they were like brothers to these guys.
Mm-hmm.
Bobby and I were really friendly, but I learned a lot from Bobby. My best story with Bobby was I used to go down to what they called the tuna melt every year in Harker's Island to
Mm-hmm.
fish for false albacore. I was invited to stay at Tom Earnhardt's house, and Lefty was at the house, and Popovics was at the house, and Ted Jurassic was at the house. All these guys, and I was in awe. You know, this is 25 years ago. You know, I was a 40-year-old kid with these guys, and I just remember I was sleeping in a room by myself. Tom Earnhardt, who put the whole thing on, had a house with a lot of rooms, and I got my own room. And I remember I was so excited the next morning to go fishing. I went to bed at like 10:30, woke up at like 2:33 in the morning. I was wide awake. I wasn't going back to bed. So I went out onto the kitchen table and I just decided I'll make a pot of coffee. No sooner that I was putting the coffee in the pot and Popovics walks out of his room. He goes, I'm so excited. I can't wait. Go get your vise and let's tie. And from 2:30 in the morning until 6, when people woke up, Bobby and I were sitting at a table tying. And that's an experience that I will take to my grave. He was incredible. He was so comfortable in his shoes. Where a lot of guys out there want to say, this is what I've earned, this is what I've done, I got to keep and protect this. Bobby was not that way. Bobby was exactly the opposite. And the proof is, if you look at his book, Pop Flies, where he talks about other tires, and he talks about David Nelson and Johnny King and Dave Skoke, all these young guys. And to me, that is the legacy that he leaves, how you pay it forward. Bobby taught me a long time ago, don't sell your flies at the show. You want to give your flies away to somebody? He goes, don't sell them. Just trust me. Give them away. Let your retailers sell them. And I'll never forget that lesson. And Lefty's favorite lesson to me at these shows was, when you're doing a presentation, make sure you make them laugh. Tell some funny stuff in between. Get a ridiculous picture in there. Make them laugh. He goes, you do that and you'll be successful in this business doing seminars. And so I took a lot away from that. And then lastly, you know, Whitlock was kind enough to write the forward for the book, you know, for the striper book that I wrote on freshwater stripers. It was supposed to be originally Lefty, and Lefty passed away before the book was complete.
Oh, interesting.
And so, matter of fact, I had a deadline, Luian, for this book, and I couldn't finish it. When Lefty passed away, I just went into a shell. I didn't pick up a pencil and start, writing on my computer for almost 9 months. And then finally I got over it and I called Dave and I said, Dave, would you write the forward? And he said, I'd be honored, because Dave was really of all the striper guys, Dave was the pioneer. Dave was the first one to teach us all about, sodium free stripers, freshwater stripers. He was doing it in Oklahoma, and so that's what I could tell you about those guys. We're very fortunate to have them in our lives.
That's great.
Well,
Henry,
awesome stories.
can't thank you enough. Before we go and we talk about the schedule upcoming, just want you to know I was looking at people, and there are people from all over the country who attended tonight, up and down the East Coast, from Tennessee to Maine to Florida to your home state now. It's quite a turnout and quite a testament to you and your fly tying. So to everybody who attended, I really want to say thank you. And of course, Henry, you were the draw, and I want to thank you very much for being our guest tonight.
Well,
Thank you, Henry.
I appreciate it, and I'll tell you, I can't wait. I can't wait for Johnny King to get up to the plate, and then Jason Taylor, and then after that, Blaine Chocolate. I mean, it's just you guys are putting on such. More people need to know about what you're doing, and I am going to do what I can to help promote it. I can just tell you that. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Well,
Thank
we
you
really
very much.
appreciate that. It's a labor of love, but we feel it's a gift that you give your time, and all of these master, fly tyers are giving their time for the next
Yep.
generation of anglers to learn from. So
You
Yeah.
got to
thank you,
pay it
Henry.
forward. You got to pay it forward. It's just that simple.
Absolutely.
If we learn anything from Pops and from Lefty and Whitlock and all of those folks, it's exactly that. Pay it forward. So thank you, Henry, and thanks
right.
to everybody
Henry,
out
thank you,
there.
everyone. Yep.